Thank you so much to everybody at SBS. Alan, you guys inviting us up here. It's been a great chance. And yeah, I just love getting together with a bunch of regens and seeing what other people are building in this space. I'm very grateful to you, Kevin, and everybody at Gitcoin. We would not be here if it wasn't for the grant rounds. And I'm just curious to step back and look at the story a little bit. I remember when I first found quadratic funding as a concept, it was like a major unlock for me. When did the concept first come to mind? I know it was actually Vitalik who coined it, but how did you come interaction with the concept of quadratic funding?
Yeah, so Gitcoin was founded in 2017, took some of the money I made in the bull market back then and built a brand, got it funded by Joe Lubin, and at the time we were like a bounties network, which was basically like if you do X, you will get Y coins. But our mission has always been to grow and support open source software, and it has later evolved to expand into all digital public goods. And in 2018, we were just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. We had an ad network, we had a bounties platform, we had NFTs. We actually had a labs and research group that was led by Austin Griffith. And we launched Gitcoin grants in January 2019. And at the time, the big idea was to have a subscription service where you could subscribe to your favorite open source projects, and like the Netflix model where you just like give them $9.99 a month, and then over time they have a stable base of support. And we launched it, and it was just like crickets. The initial Gitcoin grants launch didn't have a lot of traction, and at the time, Vitalik and Glenn had just come up with this idea of capital-constrained global radicalism, which is now colloquially called quadratic funding. And my co-founder Vivek was like, hey, maybe this is a great way to get people into using Gitcoin grants. Like, let's sub out the subscription module for quadratic funding and make that the primary feature. And we did, and raised $50K for a bunch of different projects in Gitcoin grants round 1 in, I think, February 2019. And it's just been this really amazing mechanism that solves the multipolar trap of funding public goods. But it actually gets people to care about funding public goods, because you give $1 and you have $100 of impact, which is just like, Vitalik and Glenn are so smart. Like, I feel like they gave me this, they're like this like alien perfect energy crystal of an idea, and we're just the ones that are implementing it in the world. So yeah, I'm just most proud that our mission has always been grow and sustain open source, and then we've just been tactically very malleable in how we do it, and that's what allowed us to find quadratic funding. If we hadn't done that, then we'd just be like a bounty network, and I don't think we would have had as much of an impact as we have.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the absolute perfect way to fund public goods. And in theory, you see all of this kind of potential, but what has it actually been like in practice implementing this? I mean, it sounds like a pretty complex web, because you've got all of these different attack vectors. What have you learned in the process?
Lots of stuff. So Gitcoin grants round 1, it was $50K and had on the order of a couple hundred contributors. And now we're up to Gitcoin grants round 14. We run them every quarter and have done $5 million per quarter with 700,000 contributions. So it's like 2-3 orders of magnitude growth and scale. And I'd say that Gitcoin grants is basically run by now Gitcoin DAO, which is the entity that has governance rights over the community. So first thing was that if we wanted to have legitimacy, it should be governed by the community that it serves, and that's why we launched GTC, the governance token of the Gitcoin network. And like in 2017, everyone was launching tokens, but they didn't have any traction, and we like really wanted to avoid launching a token when we didn't really know what it was yet. And so we had, but in 2021, when we launched Gitcoin DAO, we have like governance problems coming out of the years. And so that's why the genesis of GTC, the governance token of the network. And so just like operating the rounds is just like, you got to have a playbook for that. You got to enable grant owners to be successful in marketing their grant to their community. And that's in sum how you make Gitcoin grants successful. And then there's a bunch of interesting sort of problems that come out of running the rounds. First, you have to find $3 million per quarter to give out in the matching pool. So we've got kind of like a really great partnerships and relationships team. And thankfully, the community has embraced Gitcoin and is willing to give between $25K and $250K per pop to these rounds. And we're just so thankful that the community cares enough about our mission to do that. But it kind of creates this perpetual motion machine in which you always need to be fundraising and support and visibility for public goods. Unless we could, like, I don't know, like convince Optimism or someone else to just put some of their sequencer fees into the round. And then the last thing I'll say is that Sybil attacks are a thing. So basically, because Gitcoin grants, the way it works is that if you have a grant that has 100 contributions and you raise $100, and if I have a grant that has $100 from one contributor, then you get 99% of the matching pool, because quadratic funding optimizes for the number of contributors instead of the amount funded. But the problem with that is that if I'm a gray hat or a black hat, I'm just like, oh, I'll just take my $100 contributions and put it into 100 different accounts. And that's called the Sybil attack problem. And we're kind of just, I mean, we're trying to take that very seriously, and we have a whole fraud defense team at the DAO. And so we just released Gitcoin Passport, actually, to like accelerate the network effects of Sybil resistance. Anyway, that was a meandering tour through it. Governance and operations is the main thing. Continual fundraising and Sybil attacks are like the three legs of the stool that we're tuning in.
I think the Sybil attacks concept was interesting to me because as you participate in the grant round, you see the magic of quadratic funding. It's like, oh my gosh, if I could just create a bunch of wallets, like we could make a crazy amount of money. And the process of going through to identify yourself through Bright ID and like connecting social networks and all these things is kind of clunky. And I understand that that's what Gitcoin Passport is trying to address. But looking at identity, you kind of have this balance between increasing trust, but also exposing people's personal information and their identity, right? So how are you guys balancing those vectors of trust, information disclosure, and people wanting to control what they disclose and how they become known on the web?
Yeah, I think that it's important to take the privacy information and be responsible with it. And it's like a shame that it's something I even have to say out loud, but building from privacy up is really important. So our Passport basically is a state machine that takes any on-chain and off-chain data, stores it as a stamp, which is really just a DID, in the Ceramic network, which you have like a privacy maintained data store there. And then from there you can issue scores on top of those stamps. So basically what we have is a personhood score, which is basically the total cost of forgery of your account. That is actually what Gitcoin Grants cares about consuming, is the personhood score. And when you have a $10 personhood score, you can give up to $10 worth of matching. If you have $100 worth of personhood score, then you can give $100 worth of matching. And what that does is it makes it, if you're a Sybil attacker, it makes it more costly to create fake identities than you're going to get benefits out of the round. And so that's kind of the architecture of Gitcoin Passport. But the elegant thing is that the DApp only needs to read your personhood score. It doesn't need to know your name, your identifiable information, or any of that kind of stuff that's in the Ceramic store. So it's just creating a balance in which you only expose the personhood score and nothing else about the user to the DApp. So we're trying to design it with privacy from the ground up. We're intentionally using stuff that doesn't have biometric data or your like real world passport data in it, just to lower the stakes a little bit. And yeah, TLDR, privacy, and that kind of security is really important.
Totally, and I think you coined a kind of term for it, Lunarpunk, right? That's sort of taking this privacy concern alongside the aspect or aspiration of regeneration. Like, who's working in this space? What are some kind of interesting thought leaders in that intersection?
Right, so I didn't coin that term. I guess just part of being in the public eye means that I get accredited.
You're not the meme lord for everything, just lots of things.
Yeah, I'm just maybe the loudest amplifier of some of these ideas. So basically the idea of Lunarpunk is, in this space, I would argue that we have two very strong value systems. The first is the cypherpunks. If you read the Cypherpunk manifesto, you'll see strong themes around privacy and sovereignty. And the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace is kind of like the canonical text that I would recommend that people read for cypherpunk. And then on the other end of the spectrum, well, actually doing this is good, right? Like right to left. Okay, so cypherpunk is on the right end of the spectrum. Left is Solarpunk, which is more about sustainability, regeneration. I would argue that this event is a very Solarpunk event. evokes this idea of a world in which we solved our contemporary problems with climate change and multipolar traps and stuff like that. And the intersection of the two is Lunarpunk. So you've got this privacy and sovereignty of cyberpunk, and then you've got the public good supporting of Solarpunk. And Lunarpunk is the intersection of those things. And so Solarpunk is very sunny and very bright and optimistic, and everything's out in public. But Lunarpunk is like supporting your community under the cover of darkness. It's kind of like a glow around a campfire is the motif that it recommends. And Stephen Reed has been doing a lot of great work on writing about Lunarpunk. Lunarpunk Dorati on Twitter. I actually only know these people really from Twitter, and so there's people who are creating imaginations about these different themes out there, and then there's also people who are working on privacy and cryptography and public goods, and I think that over the next years we'll see it all kind of swirl together into hopefully more and more stuff that respects both value sets. Oh, and there's also someone on Twitter who's been writing about Terrapunk, which is a fork of Solarpunk that's more high human and more a recognition of basically masses of humanity and how they're going to survive in this more sustainable world. And so there's just a lot of kind of intellectual dialogue about these different value systems, and for some reason they all have the appendance of punk. So I don't know. I'm 37. I'm past my punk stage in my life, but that's what the dialogue is.
Man, I love you making sense of it for me, because I'm pretty new to this space, and I came into this seeing all these punks, crypto punks, solar punks, lunar punks, and I'm like, I'm not sure where I fit into this, but I love it.
Yeah.
This is definitely my home. And
Totally.
I'm really encouraged to see you lean so heavily into this concept of regeneration. I know you did some time over December and January working on Green Pill. What was the real catalyst to take time out of your life, with everything else going on, to write the book? Was there anything that happened in your personal life or anything in your professional context that was like, okay, I've got to put my head down and write about this?
Totally. So this is what I do now: is I just hold up books on stage and say, "Buy this,"
or get it for free if you've got any extra.
Yeah,
copies.
I've actually been giving out more for free than I've been selling, but
I bought one. It's cool.
Yeah, it's fine. It's because it's not about the revenue. It's really about the propagation of the ideas. Which, by the way, the book is like a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's because we're really standing on the shoulders of giants. All these people have come up with amazing ideas around prisoner's dilemma, game theory, economics, spiral dynamics, 8 forms of capital is Gregory Lando's idea, which I don't know if I see him in the audience, but it's TLDR. It's not really my ideas. It's like an aggregation of everyone else's ideas and put it in a mimetic capsule that anyone can consume. Which reminds me, if you want any green pills during our interview.
Oh, definitely, bro.
Yeah.
These are actually green pills.
Yeah, they're just Tic Tacs. But sorry, you asked me a question. Why did I write the book?
Yeah, like what inspired you? Because when I first stumbled on Gitcoin, I think GR13, there wasn't. I think that was the first climate round. So you guys had already signaled that this was a value you're going to lean into, and
right.
Recognizing climate change is one of these major coordination failures you need to address. And then I get the public good side, but then leaning into regeneration for natural capital and the earth, like it seems like there's been a shift, or maybe it's been undercurrent a long time, and now you just have the right words to frame on it.
Yeah, I don't know if we found the right word still, but I do think, okay, so I'd say the primary catalyst, and there's a lot of subcurrents, like Gitcoin grants going from being driven by a company to being driven by a DAO is one major current. Trying to solve Sybil attacks and fundraise is another major current, and trying to grow quadratic funding is a major driver for us. But I think that the primary thing is a recognition that quadratic funding is good, but it's not the only mechanism. So pluralism at the base layer of our next generation civilizational scale infrastructure for funding public goods is a feature and not a bug. So basically a diversity of mechanisms and funding sources that all in a diversified way funds different sets of public goods and communities. And that quadratic funding is going to be one of the main arteries that sends out funding to these impact DAOs, but there's going to be a diversity of mechanisms that is going to do this. And I'm someone who like lives and breathes my work at Gitcoin. It's like something I have a hard time letting go, like at the end of the day. And it's just because I care so much. And like when I look at my kids, I'm like, like, oh fuck, what kind of world are you gonna grow up in? And it always takes me back to the idea of how do we build information age institutions that support the public good and support communities, and they're like a life raft from our institutional age institutions that are decaying. And that's like this like thought loop that I keep getting in. And one of the things that kept happening was that like at first I felt like Gitcoin was going to have to discover and invent all of those things. And it was actually a moment of great release for me to be like, oh wait, we don't actually have to do that. We just have to create or be a part of the creation of a mimetic shelling point around regeneration using crypto. And we're just like kind of the first ones at the dance, but we're gonna discover all these amazing other entrepreneurs in the mimetic and like social and educational shelling points. And so it was just like planting an attractor for that was kind of the idea with the Green Pill book. Nice. And anyway, so basically, I think that education is the ultimate anti-fragility that you can create, because as soon as you've been green pilled, you have the mission, and you have the framing, and hopefully a suite of mechanisms and connections that you can use to come up with your own mechanism. And even if only like 1 out of 5 of them actually becomes the scale of Gitcoin, then it's still a success. So anyway, it's going from, I would say that our strategy for the first couple of years of Gitcoin was just like deep on Gitcoin grants and quadratic funding, but now it's more of like an umbrella, or like, I don't know, people like mycelial networks here, so we'll call it a mushroom. Like there's like creating a broad tent that other people can come to was the idea with the Green Pill book. And what my one skill is taking like galaxy brain ideas from Glenn and Vitalik, like the 36-page paper, and making it into a consumer web experience or like memes. And it's the same sort of thing, just taking all these galaxy brained ideas and putting them in a mimetic capsule and marketing it is what the book is meant to do. So anyway, you can get the Green Pill book at greenpill.party, which is the website that we've set up to sell the books. And we've also got a podcast about the same topics where we're getting into the nitty-gritty of that, and just had Daniel Schmachtenberger on it, and Balaji Sivarasan, Vitalik's been on it. And it's been really just kind of great to see all these other regen people show up, and that really, really think that we can do something good with the world. And I hope that... Yeah, the book is subtitled "How Crypto Could Regenerate the World," and the next one I would like to write is "How Crypto is Regenerating the World."
Yes, we got it.
So all we got to do is draw the rest of the owl on that one.
Nice. It's been awesome to see, and I think one of the ideas that was a little bit unclear for me that hopefully you can crystallize is like, what is the relationship between funding open source software as a public good and actual on the ground regeneration? Because I see that you see there's a correlation here, but I'm kind of missing, what the relationship is.
Right. So open source software is a digital public good, and public goods mean that it's non-excludable, non-rivalrous, and the idea there is that if you fork an open source repository, that doesn't stop me from forking it non-excludable, non-rivalrous good, as opposed to like something that we get on Amazon, which is, if you buy it, then that's one less inventory that I could buy. And so the idea with open source software is there's a couple things that make it an interesting breeding ground for building these mechanisms. First, no nation state government is really good at supporting open source because it's a global coordination problem, okay? Number 2, we just fell ass backwards into a community that already understood MetaMask and transactions and gas fees. And in 2018, there's no DApps that really have a ton of adoption other than like DEXs, because no one understands how to do this. So like we're funding developers, and they're the ones who can actually figure out how to use this tech. So we just have like a 4-year head start on wallet usability because we get to totally sidestep the problem. Okay, so then it's just about generating mechanisms that will actually solve the coordination problem of digital public goods. And then you have proof points that allow you to solve Sybil resistance, figure out how you fundraise for it, and we've got 14 rounds of experience on that. anyway, so that's the kind of like why start in open source part of your question. I think your question was like, how does that translate into other public goods and especially local public goods?
Yeah, and just physical public goods, right? Like, the most pressing coordination challenges that I see are climate change, biodiversity collapse, the entire systemic injustice that we have in our society. And
Yeah.
I see that there is a correlation. I just don't understand like how it's relating, that if we pump money into public digital goods, how
Yeah.
that then relates to funding on the ground regeneration, which is, preventing trees from being cut down, planting more trees,
Right.
improving all of those specific things.
Yeah. I think one of the beautiful things about this space is that there's a couple of beautiful things about the space. There's also some nasty things about the space. But one of the beautiful things is that I don't think that Gitcoin is going to solve all those problems, nor would I project that they are going to. We're creating a mimetic and social Schelling point that gathers people who are working on those problems. And I think that experts in the field and people that are local and indigenous to those communities should be the ones that are figuring out how to solve those problems. But we can pump funding out. I actually like the word pump. We're going to create an aqueduct of funding out, an artery out of funding out to communities that are trying to solve these problems. And it could be like their first funding for getting off the ground. And we can run quadratic funding rounds for those problems, but we're actually at this really interesting turning point where Gitcoin Grants 1.0 was the centralized monolith that like I coded, and like in 2018 it felt like every time it blew up I would like be working 12 hours a day and like drinking a whiskey and solving the problem and like it was just very duct taped together because it was a 1.0, and now we're launching Gitcoin Grants 2.0, which is a decentralized modular way of solving the problem. And I'd say that we're really trying to go from like fishing for you by running the quadratic funding rounds for you to teaching you to fish. So partnering with other DAOs that want to take the magic of quadratic funding and apply it to whatever their mission is, and hopefully partnering with other quadratic funding platforms like Giveth and CLR Fund and even Optimism's retroactive public goods, and providing them technology that they can deploy in their own communities. And in the heart of the pandemic, we ran. Here's actually an example from the other side of the thought, is that in 2020, coronavirus was ravaging a lot of parts of the world, but my own hometown in Boulder, Colorado, was seeing a decrease in foot traffic of like 97% in the downtown Pearl Street Mall. And so we pioneered this tool called Downtown Stimulus, which was a quadratic funding experiment for local communities in Boulder, Colorado, and did a $50,000 quadratic funding round denominated in US dollars, not tokens, because none of these people care about tokens, and funded a comic book shop, a yoga studio, a bookstore, a coffee shop, and there's one other thing I can't remember, and basically helped them pay their rent for a month. And quadratic funding works perfectly in real world as long as you take out the tokens. And so, I think like going back to Gitcoin Grants 2.0, like if we can go from like fishing for you to teaching you to fish, I would love to give a quadratic funding toolkit to anyone in the top 10,000 like towns across the world and have them run quadratic funding in their own communities. But again, quadratic funding doesn't solve anything, right? Part of this is the humbleness and the recognition that there's going to be other ways of inventing mechanisms that support those things. So I guess the TLDR answer is that we haven't solved that, nor would I represent that we've solved that. But that's the way I kind of build a bridge between what we're doing and the global coordination problems like climate change, and then also the local community which should be around local community values and local community shared needs. And the ultimate cool thing about Ethereum and Web3 is that we've got a global, transparent, immutable, and programmable substrate for human coordination. And so like we've already got the bottom layer of the stack, like finance and programmable finance. Now we just have to build the mechanisms on top of it and put funding into it, which is a much more surmountable problem with the global coordination issues. And I think that that's why blockchain is well positioned to solve global coordination failure. And then with local communities, actually, this is a really important thing that I've like just really been humbled by a lot recently. Is like the local communities. It should be local communities deciding what their shared needs are and pursuing those, like finding coordination mechanisms to get their shared needs. And the thing that is so fucked about Web 2 is that you just have these like top-down monolithic tech giants that all they want to do is extract a subscription fee from you, and so they have a one-size-fits-all solution that they have a monopoly on. And I really think that forkable open source code is such a better positioned way of giving communities ways to coordinate around their shared needs. Because not only can they fork it and remove whatever fee that is extracting from them, but they can fork it and change the language to their own native tongue. They can change the mechanism to fit whatever their local needs are. And so you kind of have to expect that there'll be someone with token or with software skills that can deploy these things in these local communities, but they can be embedded in the communities, and I think that that's a major thing. So I don't know. I'm kind of like meandering through the problem space, but TLDR we haven't solved it, nor do we represent that we have. But I think that there's valuable inroads being made, and hopefully invite me back at SBS 2028, and we'll talk about how it's been solved.
Well, I think a lot of it is just about awareness. I mean, think about how many early stage climate projects would benefit from just creating a grant on Gitcoin. There is such a hugely generous community in Web3. I was blown away in our first grant. Some random person I've never met before gave us $10,000.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who I was. Nobody heard of the podcast. And Momus.eth, uploaded a file to IPFS with this kind of manifesto and said, here's $10,000.
Wow.
Gave a huge amount of money to a bunch of these climate rounds. And it just shows that actually the values in Web3 are deeply aligned with the way that we need to coordinate to address climate change.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this kind of new identity that's emerging that supersedes the nation state. And it's not like people in Web3 come around touting their national flags. It's like, actually, we're a part of something new. This is a sort of new organization structure that gives us a sense of belonging. And so, for all those people working on projects on the ground, like I saw there was, one in Kenya that was doing basic reforestation work, and they got several $1,000s from Gitcoin throughout the matching rounds. And so, very, very optimistic to see where this goes. And yeah, I'm curious, like, what ideas have been percolating through SBS and at ECC. I know you've heard a lot of different talks, like the one from Juan Benet yesterday. Like, is there anything that's really standing out to you as mental models that you'll take in this season ahead?
Yeah, really great question. I think that what I'm excited about right now is Sybil resistance and bootstrapping a Sybil resistance, and what would it look like to, like, Gitcoin Passport is one of these tools, but Bright ID and Proof of Humanity and all these other tools. Like, what if we could bootstrap an economy of dApps that have Sybil resistance built in at the base layer, and that would allow us to measure the Gini coefficient of those things. We could build more democratic one human, one vote DAOs. We could build quadratic voting DAOs. We could do Sybil resistant airdrops, and I'm saying we, but like I really mean the wider we. We just want to solve the Sybil resistance tool and generate more dApps using Sybil resistance with more Sybil resistance and more utility, which draws in more users, which creates more dApps. So like spinning that flywheel of Sybil resistance and blowing that economy up, almost like a bubble, but not one that'll pop. I got to come up with a better analogy than a bubble. But like that economy, the Sybil resistant democratic DAO economy, is like a big thing for me. And like, by the way, if Web3 is ever going to go mainstream, it needs to move from just like money games on top of money games, decentralized casinos, which by definition you need to have capital to participate in. Yep. If it wants to move to the other 99% of humanity, it has to provide utility for the median citizen of the world, which is probably doesn't, like, their financial lives is their jobs, not their investments. So Sybil resistance has a ton of upside for many value-aligned reasons. I really am into, so that's idea number one, Sybil resistance. The next idea is decentralized society. So basically, Vitalik, and has anyone read Pooja and Vitalik's paper about soulbound tokens in Glenn's too? A few hands have gone up. Okay, cool. So basically creating a network of attestations in which I can say, I could issue a verifiable credential or a soulbound token to you that says, hey, John's really good at hosting podcasts, and also he's been green pilled. And so basically what that is There's the issuing entity for the verifiable credential, there's who it's pointed at, and then there's the verifiable credential, and then storing that on a decentralized network like Ceramic or on Ethereum, depending on what your values are around privacy. And then the total sum of the networked credentials that have been issued in the plurality of what I just issued to you, and then also POAPs, and then also who's contributed to what Gitcoin grants rounds, and what DeFi projects have you created, you start to bootstrap what looks like a directed graph of identity. And that's really cool because it can be used to allow us to build all sorts of stuff that is just tailor-made to people in specific sets of intersectional identities. So basically, I think that there's a lot of neat stuff that'll come from that data layer, and just the broader idea of decentralized society is really cool to me. So Sybil resistance, decentralized society. I'm really excited about impact certificates is the third one. So basically, the idea here is that there's 100 different impact DAOs in the Ethereum space, which by the way, like immediately after I wrote the the Green Pill book, the first podcast that I was on asking about it, they were like, "Okay, Kevin, cool theory, crypto can regenerate the world, but is anyone actually doing it?" I was like, "Fuck, I'm gonna have to write another book, like listing out all of the other projects that are doing it." So we wrote this impact DAO book and found 100 different impact DAOs that are actually doing it, are actually creating positive externalities for the world. And one of the problems that I see now that we've created the category of impact DAOs, we've defined a category. You know, there's like literally like an infographic you can share on Twitter that's the impact DAO map. The big problem I see is how do we rotate capital and talent into the impact DAOs and away from the rest of the Ponzi-nomics that is driving the rest of the Web3 space, which is, by the way, the fact that we even have to ask that question is kind of like a reflection of how perverted our values have been by the Wall Street financial system, where it's just value capture and kind of greed and short-term cycles, you know. So unlearning that, and then you can ask the question, how do we rotate capital and talent into impact DAOs? And so that's my kind of starting place, and there's going to be a diversity of things that are going to do it. Gitcoin Grants is already doing it, and so is Giveth, and so is CLR Fund, and so is retroactive public goods funding. But what is the next tranche of capital after you get out of just getting grants if you're an impact DAO? And so trying to engineer a system of incentives where there's capital that is looking for those projects mimetically, so using my like social platform to like, you know, wedge into investor conversations and be like, hey, what if we invested in stuff that's like helping people? And so there's like the social layer, and then at the technology layer, I see this is why I'm excited about impact certificates. So basically, everyone's familiar with carbon credits, where you can say I've removed 10 tons of carbon from the atmosphere by holding and purchasing this carbon credit. But then if you blow up carbon credits into any dimension of impact, you can start thinking about, how do I take 10 people out of poverty? How do I fund this open source ecosystem for a year? How do I negate the biodiversity loss in this local area? And then you can issue impact certificates, which are kind of just carbon credits, but on a generalized vector of impact. So they can be impact on a social, intellectual, living material vector, spiritual. There's other forms of capital, and I'm forgetting what they are, but impact certificates as a generalized thing. And so creating a standard that where you can issue impact certificates is part of building this architecture. And then what you do is you have these impact DAOs, and you say, hey, issue impact certificates for all of the impact that you're creating. We'll find ratings agencies for each of the different vectors of impact certificates, and bootstrap an ecosystem of ratings agency that adds the credible neutrality that like this impact DAO is claiming that they've created X amount of impact. We actually think it's X divided by 2, and so this impact certificate is now credible. And then once you have that, and you have liquidity, and you have a breadth of impact certificates, then what you do is you start going to the capital, and you say, hey, check out this speculative asset, the impact certificates, and like capital knows how to like interface with speculative assets. They ape into it. Like that's the interface. And so creating a market for impact certificates where basically basically people are purchasing these impact certificates, and maybe they do it because they've got an ESG goal. Maybe they just want to show off to their Tinder date how much positive impact they've created for a world. Maybe they feel guilty about working at a hedge fund for 15 years or something like that, and they want to make good for it. And so anyway, it doesn't matter the reason, but the point is that we've now got buy pressure on impact certificates. And what we've done when we've got buy pressure for impact certificates is we've given every impact DAO a business model. So that fitting together feels like a beautiful dream to me, because once every impact DAO has a business model, what you've done is you've gone from having to run a huge grant application administrative arm where you're just always fundraising to just creating impact and getting rewarded for it, and that seems like a more virtuous cycle for me. So anyway, backing up to your question, which is what are you excited about right now? The first three things come to mind to me are Civil Resistance, which bootstraps one human, one vote DAOs, Decentralized Society, which bootstraps hopefully a bunch of regenerative stuff, and then impact certificates is the third one that comes to mind. And then I'd say layered on top of all three of those is just the fact that you all are here. We've got a social movement that actually sees that we can create more a Solarpunk world with Web3, and that did not exist a year and a half ago. And so that social layer just means that there's a density of talent and conversations around this that hopefully is going to bear fruit in the next market cycle or two. And we can't say that crypto is regenerating the world until it actually is, and the talent and the capital is the next thing to hook up.
Yeah, totally agree, man. And I think it's fascinating that you, in the impact certificate exploration, you're basically recreating the traditional environmental asset market. Having those decentralized organizations to attest to the impact of any given action of an on-chain asset is basically what Vera and Gold Standard have been trying to do. But it doesn't seem like you're trying to interface with that old world. You're basically saying, let's do it in a Web3 native way, using the tools and methodologies that we have, and just kind of accept that pluralist of expression. Is that right? Or are you guys actually going to be trying to, interface and negotiate with those traditional standard bodies?
Yeah, great question. So first off, you said I am doing this. I'm actually one part of a team that's doing this, which
Sure.
Protocol Labs in the network goods team is a major part. We're working with Raid Guild. We're working with the wider community to do it. So we're just one group that's working on it. And I'm always careful to try, I don't want to take too much credit because I'm the most visible. And I'm the kind of guy who will wear a t-shirt with dorky robots up on stage and talk about this stuff. But I'm a very small part of that. We are the network goods team at Protocol Labs has studied the traditional carbon markets, and I think has a fairly good understanding of it. And by the time that gets to me, I'm trying to figure out how to make it into a meme and create a movement and everything like that. So
Don't get me wrong. I think there's actually great merit in accepting that these legacy institutions are moving at the pace that they are, and are uncomfortable with some of the culture and tooling that we represent. And I think it's going to be exciting to see really passionate, talented technologists say, okay, they're not moving at the pace of change that we need. Let's go beyond it and see what kind of models that we can create. And the foundation you laid out, I think, really will be an incredible experiment to see if we can get corporate and institutional buyers to adopt these kind of decentralized impact certificates. But it sounds like earlier I heard you say that you stepped down from leadership at Gitcoin. What's behind that? Are you working on other things besides Gitcoin, and what are the core motivators behind that decision?
Yeah. Well, before I answer that, I just want to give a shout out to Griff, who's sitting in the front row, actually looking at his. Yeah. Hey, what's up, Griff? He's been really the progenitor of this idea that hey, governments exist to provide public goods, and they're spending $25 trillion on public goods, and governments, NGOs, nonprofits, and what would it look like to turn some of that capital into Web3? And I think that we can talk about how Web3 could be good for the world ad nauseum, but when we actually have that verifiable impact, I think that that's when you can go to a local government or an NGO or the federal government and say, hey, put some money into impact DAOs, and that capital rotation, I think there's a lot of upside there for that. So I just wanted to connect the idea that $25 trillion prize, which is 25x the crypto market cap, is possibly available. Even 1% of that is a lot of money. So anyway, you asked me about stepping down from leadership of Gitcoin DAO. Is that right?
Yeah. What was the motivator, and what are you doing?
Yeah. So we launched Gitcoin DAO because of this idea from political theory that the consent of the governed is the only legitimate basis for governance of systems. And Gitcoin, basically, like if we're going to try to be a pillar of the Ethereum ecosystem and eventually of the world and how it distributes public goods, can only be legitimate if it has the consent of the governed, and that's why we launched the DAO to pay down our centralization debt and our governance debt. I want to be a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together. And if I am a centralized entity that is dictating all of the operations of Gitcoin, not only do I think that that's kind of like wrong from that political theory perspective, I also think it's not as effective in a network world to try to be at the top of a hierarchy. And oh, and the other thing is people always talk about decentralization of power, but I was trying to decentralize some of my stress also
Nice.
in the launch of the DAO.
That's regenerative right there.
Yeah, well, I mean, nothing causes you to want to do it after, another bug gets escalated to you and you have to fix it, like while you should be playing with your kids or whatever. Yeah. So decentralizing power, decentralizing stress, and creating more legitimacy. And so that's why we launched the DAO. And then we kind of had this hybrid structure where Holdings had some operations, but Holdings is the company that I founded that launched, that was involved in the launch of the DAO. And anyway, so we had this hybrid structure. It was kind of clunky. It's like, the DAO does some things and the Holdings does other, and then we're like, no, let's just give everything with grants to the DAO. And I don't want to be CEO of the DAO, and I think it's more effective if the DAO is governed by the community. And so basically, I guess like after 5 years of doing this, I exert a certain amount of like soft power in the DAO, and just like stepping away from leadership is a great way to create space for other leaders to emerge. And I can interface with the governance of the DAO through everyone else, the way everyone else does, which is GTC. Yep. So I think that it's about removing centralization of power and of stress and creating more legitimacy, and also opening up my mind to think about new things. Like I've run 14 quadratic funding rounds. I don't have like new ideas about how to run quadratic funding, but exploring the idea space of impact certificates and Sybil resistance and like running a podcast are things that I would never have time for before I did that. So yeah, TLDR, it feels great to pass the torch. I think that it's so refreshing to always to be solving new ideas and be on new frontiers. And my greatest hope is that anyone at Gitcoin DAO that's listening to this is planning their exit strategy also. And by exit strategy, I mean like how do you decentralize the power and elevate the leaders below you? And if we could create this fractal of decentralization of power and creating more impact as other workstream leads step down in the DAO, responsibly, don't do it irresponsibly, then I think that would be a beautiful thing. But we'll see if that next fractal happens. I haven't seen it happen yet.
Well, dude, it's a beautiful move, and I'm grateful to learn from your journey. I'm curious to just hear like what we as a community can do to help Gitcoin on its mission. I've been so grateful. I try and give 20% of any money I'm donating back to the matching pool, and just figuring out like how can we galvanize the social movement around Gitcoin grant rounds. I'm thinking, is it bringing in more donors for match funding pools? Is it getting more EVM chains to integrate with grants too? Like what are the big asks that people can galvanize around?
Yeah, great question. I think, the nice thing about Gitcoin is you only have to think about it at like 2 weeks out of a quarter. So just like when you see, oh wait, it's Gitcoin grant season again, just like load up your cart and check out. I typically load up grants and fund them several times per round, and that's just a lot of fun to discover what's new out there and to fund those things. So 2 weeks per quarter you can give to Gitcoin grants. If you're interested in getting involved in the broader movement around Green Pill, you can go to greenpill.party and pick up the book, subscribe to the podcast, and just like spend your mental cycles thinking about these ideas. And I think that's another thing that you can do. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole, which is like not the right choice for everyone, but if you really want to go deep on Gitcoin, you can go to gov.gitcoin.co and get involved in governance. You can go to gitcoin.co/discord, which is where the sort of like chat and social selling point for Gitcoin is, and you can get involved in that way. But that's only on the level of like, hey, you're looking to spend at least 10 hours a week on this, and so there's the ways you can get involved in the Gitcoin ecosystem directly. But I think that, you know, considering that we're building a plurality first community, I'll just say that there's other great projects out there. Optimism is doing great stuff. Giveth is doing great stuff. CLR Fund is doing great stuff. Nice. And there's other projects that you can get involved in and be Gitcoin adjacent. And I'm really excited about building a pluralistic civilizational scale ecosystem of public goods funding tools. And that plurality is a feature. And so you can start your own project or get involved in any other number of projects as well.
Nice, man. Yeah, I mean, love that, and we're doing our best to help people make the most of those grand round opportunities, get more people on board. We're speaking with a lot of early stage founders in the impact space. What advice do you have for them as they're starting their journey around creating impact DAO?
Yeah. Oh, one more ask to your last question is that we're still trying to find a sustainable way to fund the matching pool. So if you have any connections with recurring, legitimate, and scalable funding for the matching pool, would love to talk to you. And it would just reduce the amount of time we have to like hustle in asking everyone to give us funds for the matching pool.
Those relationships are there in the community. I mean, definitely. I think that's a really big lift.
Yeah. So, advice for other Impact DAO founders?
Yeah, just like, you know, looking back at the beginning days, your Gitcoin journey, like, what did you learn? What did you wish you'd have done differently? And yeah, what advice would you give to a young entrepreneur saying, I want to make an impact using a Web3 organization?
Yeah, great question. I used to be a young entrepreneur. Now I'm a middle-aged entrepreneur, so nice. I don't know.
Having kids will do it to you, man.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a software engineer by training, and I really think that the way that you build credibility in this space is not to talk about your ideas, but it's to build. Show, don't tell is a huge one for me. And you know, the reason why if you go to gitcoin.co/results, you can see that we've created $65 million worth of funding for open source. And the reason that page exists is like we needed a source of truth for our analytics, but also everyone and their brother or everyone and their sister in 2017 was talking about how they're going to change open source. And they just all look the same. It's all just a marketing page with a bunch of buzzwords, and it's like buy my token. And there was no one actually doing it. Yep. It was all in support of the fundraising vehicle, which was a token sale. And we built gitcoin.co/results just to be like, this is what we're doing. This is the traction so far. And it just set us apart from like all the people who are talking but not doing. Yep. So show over tell and really highlight the data was the first thing. I guess the second thing is that you all might not know this. Like, so eventually we'll live in this world in which it'll be this beautiful utopian world in which impact DAOs will just be rewarded for the impact that they create via impact certificates, and you'll just like take a n number of carbon out of the tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, and you'll get n times x number of tokens for doing that, and it'll be a beautiful utopia. Like, you just focus on your mission. It's nice. We'll eventually get there. But until then, you need to find a way to get revenue so that you can pay salaries, so that you can build talent into there. And one of the things that I think that, like, in retrospect, when I look back at Gitcoin, is we have Gitcoin Grants, which is this charitable arm of Gitcoin. But the way we survived the bear market was by running hackathons. So basically, we have, like, marketing departments know how to pay for a virtual hackathon sponsorship. And we do like 100 to 200K a month in revenue of just selling virtual hackathons. By the way, sign up for the Sustainable Blockchain Summit hackathon on Gitcoin, everyone. And but the point is that Gitcoin Grants creates the brand halo. Like, Vitalik tweets about us because of Gitcoin Grants, and then that brand halo creates developers and marketing departments that want to get involved in Gitcoin, so we sell them hackathons. Yep. And then that revenue supports the people who are building on Gitcoin Grants. And so the toggle between creating revenue and creating impact is something that we're going to have to do until someone solves the problem of you just get revenue for impact. And so whatever your impact DAO is, like, find a way to support yourself. And I am a big fan of pragmatism and not dogmatism. Unless you have unless you have like a trust fund or something like that, you need a way to fund these projects. And in business models is the second piece of advice that you have. And the third thing is that you're going to be in an idea maze for years, weeks, months, years. There's going to be things that you'll just have to kick the can on, and the idea maze is really fun but really stressful. The idea maze is when you're trying to figure out the final form of what your project is going to be, but you have the immediate constraints of the near-term deadlines, and that's the hustle. That is the struggle of impact DAOs, and you got to take a break and you got to rest yourself. I'm 5 years into Gitcoin. It's a marathon, not a sprint at this point. And I think that you really just have to accept that you're going to try a lot of things that aren't going to work, but that you have to keep going anyway. And you kind of have to embrace not the chaos, but like the contradiction in there is like, I'm going to try this and I'm going to work really hard, but it's probably not going to work. And it reminds me of the I think it's the Heart Sutra in Buddhism. It's like this idea that sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. The Dharma is boundless. I vow to master it. The Buddha way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. That's what you're doing when you're starting an impact DAO. You're acknowledging the contradiction that your North Star is way fucking longer than anything you'll ever be able to do, but you're doing it anyway. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about entrepreneurship is that journey of cycling between the two things. So TLDR, find a business model for your thing, embrace the contradiction, embrace the impact, embrace the maze, and show don't tell are my three things there.
Preference towards building. Love it, man. Yeah. And interesting on the business model side, I noticed when I was going through Gitcoin grant rounds that you guys don't take any fees. And so how do you guys sustain what you're doing? How do you look at your value creation, value capture, and how do you manage an organization of this size? Because I know you're not in leadership now, but you have the experience of it. There's 300 people working at Gitcoin DAO now?
Right. So I think they just issued the Gitcoin DAO year-end report, and it quoted 300 contributors. I think that's the number of people who have gotten tokens from the DAO. Okay. The full-time number is more between 50 and 70. Okay. And I honestly think that there's questions about Gitcoin DAO's sustainability and financial model that the DAO is working through. I'm since the asset transfer and the passing the torch, I'm not deeply involved in that, but I think that there's some opportunities that they're brainstorming and waiting that I think that you'll see the DAO announcing publicly exactly what its strategy is on that front, just out of necessity of the bear market. Even we're so blessed to have the hackathon business model and to have Vitalik tweeting about us and because of that, we're kind of in this special category of things that have survived, and people just assume we'll survive, but I actually don't think it is guaranteed that Gitcoin will make it through this bear market. And I think the DAO needs to self-organize around its financial sustainability and maybe make some hard trade-offs in the meantime. I wouldn't feel comfortable going into specific ideas for sustainability on stage because it's really up to the DAO to define those.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. Yeah. And the community to get behind it. I mean, I totally feel like, I as a recipient of Gitcoin grants need to reciprocate, and everybody who's taking advantage of, the funding flows needs to give back. And I think that's, a total precedent worth exploring. But you mentioned earlier that, this concept of a hyperstructure is inherently valuable as something to own. Can you just unpack that briefly, and then maybe we'll open up to a question from the audience?
Yeah, totally. All right, so I'm looking at the audience right now. How many of y'all have read Jacob's post about hyperstructures? Okay, only a couple people. How many people would consider yourselves like in the Web3 blockchain space of the audience? Okay, about half of the hands. And then how many of y'all are kind of green to Web3, but more in the climate side of things? Okay, maybe like a third of the audience. Okay, I just wanted to understand the distribution of who's out there, and hopefully that matches your podcast audience a little bit too. So hyperstructures is this idea from Jacob Hearn of Zora, and basically the idea of, I think of it as like an institution in the sky, an institution in the network state. And it's basically, it's code that will run forever without intermediaries, and it'll just run on the Ethereum blockchain or the blockchain of your choice, and it runs without interruption or intermediaries, and part of the idea is to kind of get people to envision what new institutions would look like, and he called it hyperstructures. And so basically the idea that Jacob uses in the post is Uniswap is kind of a hyperstructure, because it's a smart contract system that is on Ethereum, and it works without having to have like private access to LPs. You know, all these centralized exchanges are liquidity providers, and not only are they charging you a fee for every transaction, but they're also taking the spread between the bid and the ask on every trade. And so the idea that Uniswap as a hyperstructure is that there's no intermediaries on it. Everyone who interfaces with Uniswap, whether you're a trader using their front end or you're an LP, is just using the hyperstructure, but just like a different entrance to the hyperstructure. And so, you know, that's an example of an institution in the cloud and in the network state. And I think that one of the Jacob's suppositions is that hyperstructures can be extremely valuable to own and to govern, but they don't ever really have to make any revenue. That was kind of like the radical thought of a hyperstructure, is that you can kind of have a governance token that has the right to turn on a fee switch, but it never has to actually turn on the fee switch to have value to the system. And it's something that I would like to believe. I think we'll see it play out, whether or not, you know, the threat of a fee, but it never turned on, like exactly how that works. But it was an attractive idea to me, because I like the idea that you don't need to extract from your users in order to provide value to them, and then still people who've provided capital to the project can get rewarded because it's still valuable. And I also like the idea of an institution in the network state on Ethereum, because it just feels, I mean, I'm in the United States, and this might be specific to my area, but it just feels like we're all losing trust in these industrial age institutions, and we need new information age institutions that we can rely on. And hyperstructures kind of it's kind of landed there for me. I don't actually remember. What was the question you asked me about hyperstructures?
Well, yeah, just to unpack the concept, and so
Yeah.
you can kind of see it as it relates to Gitcoin DAO and, you know, the model of Gitcoin.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, you know, it's just these ideas are radical, and they
Yeah.
change the way that people approach building software for impact. And I think
Yeah.
that was a good articulation. So something that's
Totally.
public good that provides a value or service and is valuable because it creates valuable for its
Right.
users, even though it doesn't capture the value in that, right?
Yeah, so that's like the base idea, but let me run with it a little bit more now that you just reminded me what we were talking about. So a hyperstructure that builds and supports other hyperstructures, I think, is like one way of framing where Gitcoin could ultimately be. And by the way, we'll see if the hyperstructure idea even plays out. All models are wrong, some are useful. Maybe hyperstructures is in both categories, maybe it's not. So a hyperstructure that exports public goods coordination software to the world, and it's also a hyperstructure that builds and supports other hyperstructures. So basically, it's like the first capital and the first like place at which you get talent as you're building your own hyperstructure. And I think that that's kind of a beautiful articulation of what Gitcoin could become. But again, it's up to the DAO to decide if that's what it's going to become. And I kind of like this idea of being a public good that is the generator function for other public goods. In math and computer science, generator functions are just like a function that returns another function. And so what would have to be true for Gitcoin to ingest capital from the matching providers, run it through this quadratic funding engine, and then it spits out funding for other coordination mechanisms. And so that's kind of one of the beautiful dreams that I've been dreaming, but it's too complicated to explain in like a tweet or something, so it doesn't get out there much. Thanks. I guess we had an hour here, so thanks for pulling it out of me.
No, it's great, man. Thanks.